Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon and its ecosystem. I am your host and Axonic Developer Advocate, Sara Torrey. In our second episode, I will be looking more closely into some of the architectural concepts such as domain-driven design, CQRS, event sourcing, and microservices in context with Axon Framework. To do that, I decided to speak with Axon Framework's lead developer, Steven van Beelen. Steven has been with Axonic since the very beginning, so he has an extensive amount of knowledge on the design and structure of this framework. He's also very involved in educating the community on how to use Axon Framework. He was very kind enough also to share with me some of his memories of college years and early on in his career that might be beneficial for some of you who are listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Let's have a listen. Hi, Steven. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Sarah. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. I trust you're doing well as well.
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I have so much to talk to you about. And today I want to focus more on broader topics. And I will go into a little bit of detailed stuff at a later time.
Sure.
But I wanted to share with you, I actually didn't exactly meet you, but I knew of you before I actually met you. I watched some of the tutorial videos that you had posted on our YouTube channel. And if I remember them correctly, they were the Axon Quick Start guides. I think there were 5 or 6 videos that I watched when I started sort of finding out more about DDD and Axon Framework particularly. And those were really helpful because they were short little videos. I think they were like 10-15 minutes each, and they really highlighted the main topics of what we were trying to do when starting an application using Axon. So that was really helpful. And then of course I did, I think 2 or 3 Fastlane trainings with you.
Yes, I believe you did. Yes.
Which was really good. And then I got to actually meet you at work, which is awesome. So yes, you definitely are one of my role models in the world of DDD and
that feels like too big an honor, but thank you.
No,
thank you.
It's true. So anyhow, no, thank you. Those are really helpful information to have out there and to have them be able to access it, for free for everybody and just so readily available. So that's great. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the architectural concepts today. We normally talk about domain-driven design, CQRS, event sourcing, microservices, but there might be some people out there who may not really be familiar with these terms. So I'd like to highlight those a little bit, and then also to talk a little bit about the specifics of Axon Framework that go along with these concepts that we were talking about, because I know that's the reason Axon Framework was built. It's built on the concept of domain-driven design and event sourcing. So if we can go into those topics, and you don't have to go all the way into details, but just kind of make me familiar a little bit with what we are trying to do with domain-driven design, for instance, or event sourcing.
That sounds like a great plan to get everybody on the same page, right?
Perfect.
That's definitely one of the intentions we have with things like the blogs we do and the trainings and such. And it's good to have this in an audio format as well.
Perfect. Sure. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, education, what kind of languages you worked on, and before Axon maybe, and then once you got to
Yeah, sure. To be completely honest with you, there's not that much before Axon when I started work.
Yeah.
To be completely fair with you.
That's okay. No, sometimes you find your home early, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I landed up quite early in it, and it just stuck for some reason. It just worked for me.
Yeah.
No, I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, so my primary language is Dutch. Although I understand you're asking programming language, might be interesting for others to know.
Yes, definitely.
I'm in the Netherlands. Luckily, I'm pretty proficient in English, if I may say so myself.
You absolutely are.
So doing stuff like this and works out pretty fine. I went to university here in Amsterdam. Not living in Amsterdam though, close by. Where my specialization in the matter was really going for distributed systems, mainly because that had the majority of programming in it. and I really liked the programming parts
Yeah.
of university. So I just went for that, and I just really liked it. After that, I wasn't too sure what to do work-wise. I didn't have a clue where to go for, because one thing they didn't really prepare me for in university, at least that's how it is in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
is the
Usually is,
working
I think,
life.
everywhere. Yeah.
I didn't have a clue where to start or what to do at all. So you go up to one of those people nowadays to test, the recruiters and such, just asking, well, can you fix something for me? Yeah, well, he did, obviously, because
Yeah.
that's his job. One of the things which struck me most, one of the companies which I liked most, was Trifork. At that point in the day,
Yeah.
it felt like a nice place to call home and to work for, and
Yeah.
the majority of nice projects they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I wouldn't be good enough, to be honest. But well, apparently I became it still, because they hired me.
Yeah.
And after a short period or so, I started my first project together with Allard.
Mm-hmm.
So he took me under his wing, so to say, and we started a brand new Axon project at a certain client, which I'm not sure I can name, so I won't. Yeah, there it all started. That was about 8 years ago now, I think,
Wow.
something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
And from there, it just felt very natural to make software in that way. You must realize that I came from an empty background, so to say. You only have your university behind you. You
Sure.
haven't
Yeah.
learned other ways of making software. So you start off with, this is how you build things through DDD and CQRS and event sourcing, and then it all makes a lot of sense,
Right.
because that's the way you do it. That's how it
Exactly.
feels for me, at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did that for a long period of time through Trifork. And then when we became a spin-off, Axonic, they asked me whether I wanted to join from the beginning. I was,
Yeah.
hell yeah, why wouldn't I? I love
Exactly.
this stuff. This is how you should be doing things.
Yeah.
So yeah. I joined, and now I've been a happy participant of Axonic from the start. So a bit over 3 years now, 3 years in a week to be exact at this date.
Right.
And for Axonic, I've eventually became the Axon Framework lead developer,
Very
meaning
good.
I'm doing a lot around building Axon Framework, helping people out using it,
Yeah.
fixing all the issues, talking with people about it, doing the trainings, those short videos as well, just getting the message across, I'd say.
So I have a question for you that's not related to DDD or Axon. You mentioned that in university you became more interested in programming.
Yeah.
Did you know back then that Java was the programming language that you wanted to pursue, or were you interested in other languages, frameworks, and things like that? That's one of the questions that comes up a lot with the new developers, and especially in the community, individuals who want to study programming on their own without participating in university or perhaps even boot camps. So I think that might be useful information for them to
Of
know.
course, that makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mainly leaned upon what our professors thought was most sensible.
Mm-hmm.
So the main programming courses were in Java.
Right.
We did have others where we did things like Python and more functional things like Haskell and OCaml, stuff like that. We also did C Sharp. Those things came along, but the majority of it was in Java. And well, I figured when I was done, okay, I need to start somewhere. I know I like programming a lot. Which of the languages did I use most? Well, that was Java.
Yeah.
So that's essentially where I went for. I do know that after I was done with university there, they shifted a lot of the courses for the less heavily focused computer science people to Python.
Okay.
So if you're not if your background is not fully computer science yet, it might be nice to start with something like Python, because it's a bit nicer to you than Java can be.
A little bit user friendly.
Yes, yes. Granted, they taught us to use Java without tools like an IDE at all. So
Yeah.
you just, which is, I had exams on paper. I'm not sure whether that's normal, but coding on
Interesting.
paper, I wouldn't
Interesting you
recommend
mentioned
it.
that, because I did a lot of, when I was taking a couple of Java courses online, I did a lot of note taking on paper. So I completely understand that. And I am a note taker, so that may not work for everybody. But for me, when I write something down on paper with my own hands instead of typing, it helps me remember that information and retain that
That's true.
whatever I'm learning. So I completely can relate to, but it may not work for everybody. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it did the trick
Hmm.
because they were very very harsh on pointing. So if you forgot
Hmm.
to close an
A
accolade, for
bracket, or
example,
yeah.
that was a half a point. You know, this is not
Exactly.
working code. You failed. Which, well,
Interesting.
they're right, but this is not what you're accustomed to when you're a programmer.
Right, exactly.
When you're actually using that stuff, it tells you, hey, you missed this and you missed that. You can focus on the logical thing of it.
Especially if you're
So
working with an IDE, it kind of fixes it for you, right?
exactly.
Which is nice.
But at the time, I was very put off by it.
Hmm.
But yeah, as you grow older, you do it more. I think it made sense actually,
Yeah,
because it really pushed it in you, right? And
exactly.
I think
And
that's the intent of stuff like that,
yeah,
just repeating and
this is
feeling
really
the pain,
interesting.
so to say.
Yeah. And yeah, this is really fascinating stuff. I definitely want to come back to it and have a deeper conversation with you at another time. But yeah, so just to go back to sort of like loop back to where we started.
Sure.
Can you tell me about domain driven design? That's one of those concepts that when I started learning about it, it was very abstract to me. I couldn't
Yes.
exactly wrap my head around it.
Yeah. To be 100% honest with you, when I started with Axon, this was also, I started that project, right? And Allard
Hmm.
said, well, here's the reference guide, Axon 2.0 at the time. It was just 2 point something. So, and I was reading up on all that stuff, and it was, yeah, you're pretty new to it. And
Hmm.
especially DDD felt kind of, all right, I get a feel for it, I
Hmm.
guess. I'm not sure whether you told it, but I'm going to rehearse it anyhow.
Yeah.
So Axon Framework really helps you with those building blocks, right?
Hmm.
Doing DDD and doing CQRS and doing
Hmm.
event sourcing. It really provides you the means to focus on the business functionality even more. And this
Hmm.
is also, if you think about what DDD tries to focus on, is that you model your problem space based on your domain very specifically, and that's what you're focused on. So the primary focus is on the core domain, so to say, of
Yes.
the piece of software you
And
are
I'm glad you
building.
mentioned that, because domain in this particular topic is actually talking about the business domain, right? We're talking about what we're trying to achieve from whatever application we're making in order to serve the business itself, the business side of things,
Yes,
right?
that's yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
This is how you should view it. That's typically what you move towards. That you focus on what's really needed, and that's how you model your things. So,
Right.
if you would be thinking about if you're a bank, for example, well,
Hmm.
within a bank, you can even think about that. That would be a very broad domain because a bank
Sure.
entails a lot of things. Like you have loans, you have credit cards, you have savings accounts, and all those things could be a well, in real life, they're departments on their own anyhow for a bank.
Exactly. Right.
So
Right.
those can be subdomains or entire domains as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when you're thinking about doing DDD for any of those things, you would focus on the exact thing you're doing. So if you're a banking application and you're there for credit card logic, then you would have a thing called a credit card, very likely being a very core concept of your domain.
Right.
An example I use a lot during trainings when we're going into the things when it comes to modeling your domain, so to say, so the
Right.
components you need for
Hmm.
this. I take the example for a car a lot.
Hmm.
Um, I'm jumping the gun maybe a little bit, but one of the core things when you're doing DDD is that you conceive an aggregate. And an aggregate is a group of associated objects, entities
Entities. Yeah.
actually,
Hmm.
which in conjunction with one another act as a single unit to data changes. So if
Right.
you're doing a thing on an aggregate, all the operations intermittently in it, all those entities will change as a atomic operation, or that's the intent of those.
Right.
There's another notion that you have an external reference to that object, a single point where you can access it and you can handle it, and there are consistency rules. That's really the small grouping of it.
Yeah.
And all three of those map very well to what a vehicle or what a car is, I think.
Right.
Because if you think about what a car is, it's a group of objects which belong to one another. You have doors, you have windows, you have a steering wheel, you have an engine, and you can think of those apart from the car, but they don't make a lot of sense. You think about them, I need them grouped together as a car. Right. Because within the notion of that car, I expect certain things to be consistent with one another. If I turn the engine, I expect my engine to start. Or when I turn the steering wheel, I expect my wheels to go that direction as well. So you could conceive thinking about a car as a domain model might be weird in some scenarios, but if you're thinking of it as if you're a user of a car, might map nicer if you're thinking about video games. If you would be creating a playable character which can sit in a car, and you want that character to interact with the car, then you would have a thing called a car,
right?
Because that's part of your domain, which is dealing with.
Exactly. And in that sense that you mentioned the car, for instance, I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of times domains can change as well. It just depends on what your problem is that you're trying to solve, correct? So for instance, someone might say, well, for me, the car as a whole might be a domain that I'm trying to solve whatever problem with the specific car. For instance, I'm trying to have the whole car to be the model, so that you have to have all the parts of the car. Another person might say, well, if you're looking at it in more detail, maybe the engine of the car itself can be the domain. So it really depends on what kind of problem we're trying to solve. Correct? Am I understanding?
No,
it correctly?
you're on the right page here. So it can, those concepts can mean different things in different domains essentially. So what a car is to me, how I just explained it, is what comes up to mind for me first when I'm thinking about the concept. But for somebody else, a car might have other important things, other important aspects which you need likely to solve your problem space.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned the aggregate, because that's one of the things that you can easily use with Axon Framework, because we're creating this framework to really make it easier for us to be able to map this domain a little bit better and more organized, correct? So then sort of shifting gears a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about CQRS? Because now we're talking about the big model. Now we're sort of trying to break that model down a little bit. So where does CQRS come in, and what is CQRS?
Yeah, of course. Well, firstly, CQRS stands for the Command Query Responsibility Segregation. And it's a very nice segue that we first start about DDD and then go to this, because it's not really a downside, but if you're just doing pure DDD, your model can become pretty big, because you might have a pretty complex domain space, which, well, that makes sense, because you might have a lot of concepts which are very important, which interact with one another, and you need to deal with those in conjunction. But as you're going to focus on your model, you'll notice that certain portions are more tailored towards the things you want to do, the actions you want to take, the operations, and then other parts are really that you're interested in information you need to get things done. And the idea of CQRS, of segregating a dedicated, you're essentially segregating your main model into several distinct types of models, one being your command model and the other one being the query model. So really focusing on the command model, focusing on handling operations, so it will get the actions you want to do in the system, and it's tailored towards those, making it so that those actions would be consistent, and that those cannot occur concurrently, for example, that you focus on guarding that consistency boundary when it comes to the business decisions you want to make. Those query models are really there to surface the information as clients need it, and they can focus on that. And because you segregate your main domain model into segregated types of models,
Right.
you can focus on those non-functional requirements. So maybe you have a stock trading application, meaning that a lot of people would perform operations that they want to buy or sell.
Sure.
That's the main focus of this application, buying and selling. So
Right.
a lot of actions are going through the system. If you would have a single model used for handling those actions and doing those queries, well, you need to optimize it for actions. So it will not be performant for queries ever, because that's not what it's built for.
Right.
So if you segregate that, having a dedicated command model
So the
for doing
action
those
part
stock trading
becomes the
things.
command model, right?
Yes,
So the
yes.
action is
Yeah.
the command, and then the query is the information that you're giving it and receiving from it.
Yes,
Very
exactly.
good.
Yeah. So it's really, pulling apart your domain into model into the dedicated models, just so that you can focus on these non-functional requirements you might have.
And with the framework, what are can you give me a couple of specifics, for instance, like in the way that the framework is annotated? What kind
Yeah,
of those annotations can we use to separate between the commands and the queries, for instance?
gotcha. Yes. Well, in essence, these models, so focusing on the command and the query model,
Yep.
those are things you would build yourself, because this contains the logic of your application. On the commands model side of things, you very likely have this notion of an aggregate I was just explaining.
Yes.
It's not always a necessity, but you see this lots of times.
Yeah.
So you'd have the command model somewhat mirroring the aggregate. There are
Right.
different, we can go deeper into this, would be nice for a different topic, I think.
Different
But
time, yes.
let's assume that's what we have. There's a dedicated, in Axon Framework, there's a dedicated package helping you to perform this modeling exercise. So
Right.
there's a notion that you can create an aggregate, for which we have indeed used a dedicated annotation, so that you can say, okay, this class, the car, for example, this piece of
Yes.
Java code
Right.
is my aggregate, and you annotate it as such. Well, okay, then you have your model. That's fine, but you need to be specific that your command model can handle commands. It
Right.
needs to handle the operations you want to do.
Sure.
So you need to have dedicated methods for this to perform these operations. And to tell the framework that those methods are actual command handlers, you would just simply use an annotation for this, the add command handler annotation.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah, but by adding that annotation, you would tell the framework, okay, this function is capable of handling this type of command.
Right.
So if somebody sends this command over the wire, then it will go up to that command handler. There's a similar thing of this for query handlers as well.
Yes.
With the query model. We do not have a similar thing as the add aggregate annotation or the aggregate model for the command model side of things,
Right.
because when you're thinking about CQRS, typically the query models, you should be free to use whichever type of database you want to use under the covers, under the hoods.
And I'm glad
there
you
are
brought that
so
up.
many options out there, right?
Right. Yeah.
So providing an out-of-the-box solution for every query model, it would be nice to have something like that one
Right.
day in Framework. That might very well be an Axon 5 or 6 thing, who knows?
But Axon, it's the framework itself basically supports both a relational database as well as a NoSQL database, correct? So you
Correct,
can,
yes.
you have, as you mentioned, you have the freedom to basically use whatever you're having. So, for instance, if
Yes,
somebody wants to use, say, MongoDB, they can easily use it. If somebody wants to
perfectly
use
fine.
SQL, they can
Yes,
use it.
perfectly fine. But you can also think from the query perspective, if you want to do text-based search, for example,
Yes.
if you just want to, like you would have a Google experience
Right.
by using your own Elasticsearch, you can just use this and handle the things which are occurring. Might be a nice thing to segue into. If I'm stealing the explanation, you
Oh, please do.
should
Yes.
just
Yeah,
take the
yeah, go for
baton
it.
back, right? But an important thing when you're doing the CQRS is that we are now really thinking about dedicated models, right? With the
Right.
commands and the queries. So you could view this as having dedicated types of messages as well.
Right.
Because you have a place where you send a command operation. You can make this a message, so a command message. Similarly for a query message. Now, there's one thing when you're doing CQRS, which is also very important. You have these two models, and a command model is making decisions.
Right.
This is where your operation resides, and it decides whether it's okay to perform that operation. Now, once that decision has been made, it might need to update itself, but it
Okay.
also needs to update the query models. So you need to synchronize these two. You have segregated them from one another, but they need to be synchronized.
So how do we do that? Yeah.
Yeah, right. this is this
We're
is
getting there.
this is where I want to end up in. Well,
My impatience
essentially there
coming
are
in. Yeah.
essentially there would be several options to doing this,
Okay.
but the most reasonable, that's what we're focusing on from framework's perspective as well,
Right.
is by using dedicated events for
Oh,
this.
okay.
So you can view this as a command going through the system. It will end up in your command model. It would make a decision.
Right.
And once the decision has been made, it would factualize that. It would publish an event saying, this has happened. And this very nicely captures making a decision, because an event is something which has happened. It's history. So that's why I like to use factualizing as well, because it's set in stone, right? It occurred. You need to take that event into account. That event would then be used to update your command model if necessary, but it would also go over the wire to whatever query models you have, so that they can be updated, so that they are aware of the decisions which has been made too.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the notion of history, because with the, for instance, the annotation that we use for event handler, everything that goes under it, it has to be in past tense, correct? Am I remembering that correctly from the framework?
Yeah, that's correct. You want to be very specific that your events resemble past tense things. A command really is, I want to do this, right?
Right. Exactly.
Do this.
Yeah.
So you would describe them as such. Whilst if it's an event, it's something has happened. So describe them as such. Give the class name to resemble the thing which has happened. In case
and
of
I think
event.
that's kind of brings us into the event sourcing, right? That's what we're talking
Nice
about when we really say event sourcing is when we can really document all of these events that happened in the past, so that we have a really clear idea of what is happening. So can you go a little bit deeper into that for me?
Yeah, sure. So it's a segue into this synchronization logic when you're having a distinct. If we take our car example, let's go back to that. So I was explaining the car as being an aggregate from when we were talking about DDD. When we're doing CQRS, you would have a car in your command model, and you would have likely a notion of a car in your query model. The one in your command model is really to saying, okay, I want to turn on the engine. That's what the car command model would use. And it would say engine turned on, for example. That event would be published. Now, this would go into the query model so that it can update himself. Pretty fine. But some of these things you would handle in your command model, you need to change your own state as well. Now, we're already publishing events, and we can use these events as our main means of storage, essentially, because you want to share it with everybody. So if we are certain that all our models, so not only our query model, which is already built up of events, but if also our command model is built up out of events, we're certain that we have a single source of truth for both our types of models, for all the things we create. So if we are certain that all our events are always there and reachable and set in stone so that they represent what has actually happened, we are certain that everything's going to be as we expect it to be, that nothing inconsistent might occur. So formally, when we're really describing two distinct models with CQRS, you could just store your command model as is. That's a choice you have. But what we're going into when we're doing event sourcing is, instead of serializing this thing and storing it into a database, we're using all the deltas, the events, as the means to recreate the command model. So what event sourcing really, from that perspective, states is that you're sourcing a model based on the events it has published himself. And I'm saying it very specifically because you're sourcing your own based on your events. So a command model would never handle events from other command models, from other aggregates, because those aren't used to rehydrate themselves. Those aren't deltas it has published.
Yeah, that's really interesting and really important too, because we want to make sure that we have, as you mentioned, a single source of truth, and that basically comes down to really being specific about storing these events and having them in our basically event model, correct? So that we can come back to it if need be. And so one of the subjects that came up when I was talking to a couple of our other developers was that, so we want to keep events as something that happened in the past. They're immutable. We shouldn't change them. What if we have to? Is
What if
there
we
a
have to?
way?
Yes, well,
And why would we
um,
have to?
why would we have to? Well, one of the important pillars of when you're thinking back of doing DDD as well is that your model will change over time. You're in conjunction with your developers and with your domain experts, you're conceiving what the model is
Mm-hmm.
and things like the operations you can do and the things which happen, the events are part of that domain.
Right.
So those might change over time. So you need to have some form of freedom that you can change old events to newer formats. Now, from a conceptual stance, you wouldn't change events ever.
Okay.
Essentially,
Yeah.
this is
Don't touch
you're
it.
storing those in events
Right.
in a thing called an event store, and it's history, right? It
Yeah.
has happened.
Yep.
As much as I'd like to change things, bad things I've done in the past or stupid things I've done,
Right.
that's not something I can do.
Sure.
It's just not conceivable
Yeah.
because we haven't invented time travel yet. Maybe we will never. But granted, taking that stance, you would argue that when you're using an event store to rehydrate your command model, your query model, you would arguably do the same. But we're all, or some of us might be, maybe others who are listening aren't. I'm going to assume we're all developers,
Yeah.
maybe from a theoretical stance or a practical one, but
Yeah.
still, you know that those things are stored. So you actually do have the power to change them. However, from a conceptual stance, I would still argue you wouldn't do this. You
Right.
wouldn't update them. So instead, the framework provides a means to resolve this, where you can change old versions to newer versions on the
Oh,
fly as they are needed. So
yeah.
you aren't changing the actual stored value,
Mm-hmm.
you're changing it to mirror more current ideas of what your domain looks like.
Right. Right.
The way the framework calls this is an upcaster. Sure, going from version 0 and upcasting it to version 1 and then
I
going to
see.
version 2
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. Yeah, so this is how we resolve that.
Very cool.
I know there are different opinions out there,
Yeah.
which is fine. This is the choice the Axon Framework at least makes.
Right.
It doesn't mean, although I'd be very specific about never changing events, it doesn't mean that there might be scenarios where you have to.
Oh, I see.
Maybe you have made a very terrible decision in your or aggregate design in the
Mm-hmm.
size of your aggregates, for example. So the number of events which belong to a given aggregate to recreate it, or you have so many of these upcasters that it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a performance bottleneck.
I see.
You need to solve those things, and then comes the time, if that might occur, that you hit those roadblocks that you and your team, so
Mm-hmm.
not just the developers, but again, also the domain experts. You want to have everybody in there, everybody who's aware of the system.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make a decision that are these old events we published 1 year, 2 years,
Right.
10 years ago? Do we need to keep them in that format, or
Mm-hmm.
can we move them over to a newer one?
I see.
So are we going to actually make an actual change? This must be a very conscious decision if you're
Right.
going to do this. Again, this is where these upcasters will help, because first you build those things because you're doing things on the fly, and that's fine. And at a certain moment you think, okay, I need to cut them over, and then you're just going to use your upcasters to read from an old store and publish
Mm-hmm.
to a new one.
And that's one of the
But
really cool things, because then you don't have to really mess with the entire application. And that's what I think what we talk about microservices, right? When we say you can actually pick parts and tweak them as you need to in the future, right? For instance, if you're having an aggregate, as mentioned, that's becoming too big and too complex, then you can take that version, update that version, which is upcasting, and then create a new version. Correct?
yeah, you're
Is
going
that
the right
okay? Am
angle
I
here.
on the sort of right
No, no,
path?
yeah,
Yeah.
you're fine. I'm
Yeah.
going to add a specific thing
Yes,
here
please,
because,
please.
especially the microservices point of it all is
Mm-hmm.
this wasn't how Allard at least conceived Axon Framework from the start. Because, well, in 2010, when it started off, microservices wasn't really a thing. You were just making nice, cleanly segregated monoliths. That was the intent.
Right.
But as it was doing everything through the focus of messages already, using dedicated command messages and event messages and query messages, distributing that, segregating those things out was very natural to do, a very natural approach to take. Well, this essentially means that your messages, those are the core API. Those are the language that is the language your application speaks with the outside world. So if that is changing incrementally or being specific about what you can use and what you send out to the rest of the world, how it's done under the covers, how big your command model is, how small it is, or how your query models answer that thing, or how that's stored, you could indeed change that. So this is a thing. I'd like to add another concept here, if you don't mind. I hope we're
please,
not.
Please. That's why we're talking about it, right?
Yeah, sure. But I'm always, I can go on, and I'm always a bit scared if I'm making it too.
That's why I love talking about this stuff with you, because you're very knowledgeable, so it's helpful. Yeah, please.
Awesome. Okay, I'm happy about that. Thanks. One of the things I just stated is that Axon initially was just from a nice, cleanly segregated monolith perspective. When the microservices hype started 4 years ago, I think, this is actually when we saw that doing things like CQRS and DDD and event sourcing became more important, because it was a very nice stepping stone to modeling those separate services as well. And this added notion of having messages already at the basis of it all, what Axon Framework did, was a very nice means to actually pull apart this monolith. Now, I'm saying pulling apart because we suggest to do a evolutionary approach to microservices.
That was another question of mine. What is that? Exactly.
Yeah, right. It's not the destination. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's a very nice tagline, I think. But being a bit more specific, what we suggest is that you first make a nicely segregated single application containing everything you need up to that point in the form of a minimal viable product, so to say. And as you proceed in modeling your domain further and adding new concepts, you might see that this portion of the application, well, that's actually justifies to have its own team to build on, because you have your team is growing, you're going up to 30 people, and it's not manageable anymore to have 30 people on a single repository. So a non-functional requirement like that could be a very reasonable scenario to extract that component. Now, if you want to keep that freedom of being able to extract those components, the most important thing is that you're using these messages under the covers, because those messages do not care whether, when you're sending such a message, whether the other component is right next to it or is in the USA somewhere else. It will just use a command bus or a message bus, so to say, to send it over the wire, and it's that bus which knows where to send it to. So the components sending a message and the other thing handling it, they are not aware where one another are. This idea, another concept, I hope I'm again not bloating it too much. That's location transparency, which really is a networking basics. Where this is important, that when a component should not be aware of nor make any assumptions of the other component's location. And if they don't, you can just pull them apart. It doesn't matter. They can sit next to each other, they can sit in entirely different regions, and it will keep working. So also from a perspective where we started this long thread of mine, where we segue into when you're upcasting and when you need to change your aggregate, for example, you could just create this new component which can also ingest those operations, and you can change it under the hood to be the new format, and you can switch it over as the need arises, for example.
No, that's great, because I think you went through a really a nice explanation as a whole, and actually answered a lot of the questions that I had. So thank you. This is great. Yeah, because I was going to ask you about location transparency and messaging and command and query buses. Yeah, so I'm very, very happy that you mentioned all of that. So if you were to, I don't know, say there's one thing that you really wish you had time to add to the framework, what would that be? that you haven't had
What
a
would
chance
that
to do
be?
it.
Yes. What would that be? One of the things I would think would be very nice. So it's going back to this upcaster bit. The current upcasters really work for the entirety of the event stream.
Okay.
If you want this to work for a specific aggregate stream, so this transitions over when you're refactoring your model, it needs to be split into or merge certain command models.
Right.
That's not very nicely supported at this stage. And I think that's a missing thing. So although I'm explaining this concept and it is doable, yes, I'm certain it's doable. I've seen people do this. I've helped people doing this. It's not overly easy. I think we can provide a very nice API for this. So I very much want to go that direction. On top of that, this brings me to another point, which would be even deeper down the backlog, I think. That would be Axon Framework provides test fixtures. So for those who notice, you can do a given when then scenario for your aggregates, for example, which is very helpful because you think about the once after these events have happened, then if I send this command, I expect these events to occur. Nice. Such a form of test fixtures, I think it would be very beneficial for upcasters as well.
Okay.
So that you can easily test whether the logic you've created to go from one version to another actually works. I have built tests like these for clients, and each time it was a new incremental form of this, and it looked so much like a thing the framework should have. But
yeah.
So
on our next meeting, I'm gonna nudge everybody like, upcasted people up. Steven needs a little bit of quiet time to work on this. Yeah, I think it would be a really, really nice feature because I have heard a lot of the developers who actually participate in our trainings, they talk about it. So that's one of the things that they're all interested in. It's the upcasting and also the snapshots that they always want to know more about. So those are the two things that we always get questions on. So I think that would be a really, really nice features. Now I know maybe we can do it for version 5.0, you know.
Who knows?
Put it on the plans. So what kind of do we have any new features actually coming to Axon Framework? Because I think we're working on a new release at some point in the hopefully near future.
Yes, we're currently working on getting 4.4 out of the door. From a framework's perspective, one thing which has been left on the backlog for very long is for those who use Spring Boot as well, you might be aware that you have Spring Boot dev tools. That's a dependency you can add to your project that it automatically starts it up again if you've made changes. That wasn't supported through the framework just yet, and now it is.
Which is awesome. And I can tell you that because I kind of worked on it a little bit yesterday. So that's, I'm excited about it.
It makes it a lot quicker. That's very nice. Alongside that, we did some improvements when it came to setting up snapshots and filtering certain snapshots for your command model. Those things are in there. But the majority of it is a lot of quality of life changes right now. So major new or bigger things than the things I've just discussed would likely be postponed to 4.5.
I see.
That's what I currently see. But that's okay. We shifted a little how much we do for framework and how much we do for server. This main release we did a bit more for server, which is fine, I think.
Which is a good thing as well because I know that a lot of people are trying the server out as well. So that's definitely something nice to add a couple of features to that as well. We did touch really quickly on Snapshot. So I am interested to know a little bit more about it. Of course, we don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but if you were to sort of put it in a nice little package, what would you say a snapshot is and why is it useful?
A snapshot is like taking a picture of a model at a certain moment in time, but especially from the framework's perspective, from Axon, we provide all the means to do this for a command model right now. Because from the command model's perspective, so the aggregate, it's we can be very specific that we want to do event sourcing, for example. Now it's here when you're having hundreds and hundreds of events that loading might take too long because you need to load all those events. So if you take a picture of your aggregate at that moment in time and use that,
Yeah.
It's just a quicker way to load your command model.
Okay.
This is not to say that the idea of a snapshot wouldn't make sense for your query models.
Right.
It's just not that Axon Framework provides this, because we do not have a query model annotation to
Sure.
automatically load those things for
Yeah,
you.
because as we talked about it before, it's really up to the user what kind of query they want
Yeah,
to use.
because they have so much freedom in the types of databases they use, and implementing all of those, that would be
yeah, it would be a bigger project I would want to
yeah.
tackle right now. Yes, definitely. Anything else that you think might be beneficial for this more of a broader topic that we discussed? I do have so many questions, and it's really cool getting this chance to talk to you, because we did talk about some of the stuff that I wasn't planning on talking about, but I think they're really helpful for me specifically, and for maybe other people who are listening to, is useful to really have that understanding and sort of get a better overall view of what we're trying to do with the framework, as well as helping my understanding and hopefully other people's on exactly how why we use DGD and event sourcing and the CQRS. So this really all great information that I like to get into a little bit more detail of those topics, but hopefully it's for we can do it at a later time, because that would be a bit lengthier topic. Yeah.
I'd be very much up to doing another chat like this, just
Awesome.
to
Yes.
proceed on a more
I will hold
specific
you up to that.
format. Yeah,
Awesome.
sure, that's completely fine.
And Stephen, do
Yeah.
you anything else that you want to add?
I don't know. I think one of the key takeaways of what we try to do with Axon Framework, but essentially with all the products, is one of the things that you do with DDD, I feel, is that you focus on your domain, on your business,
Right.
on solving that. And that's what we try to provide or do with Axon Framework as well.
Right.
That you can focus on your business problem, and that's that.
And make it easier.
Yes, yeah, and then make it work and make it fast and make it efficient, and that you have all these knobs and bolts only when you actually need them. You don't have to define them up front. Doing those optimizations is something you can do after it, because the framework does provide them. Nobody is requiring you to use them, so you can just focus on your the flexibility. I think that's I always like to be that's a very strong mantra for me when we're building a Axon Framework. That should be the focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Then that makes sense. So that's a huge thing. I think for me personally, in the past, where I came up with an idea for an application and I wanted to use it, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this huge complex issue that you're trying to make your application more organized, but then you don't know where to start. So that's really good to, and that was one of the things that the main thing that really attracted me to the framework itself and to the concept of domain-driven design, and being able to really segregate between the commands and queries, and then event sourcing. So that's really great that you helped me understand it and touched more into a little bit of a more detailed conversation on that. And I think it's worth mentioning as we're getting towards the end that a lot of the information that we talked about today is available on our website, and a lot of it is also available.
Correct.
We have fantastic documentation that I think is really helpful if somebody is just trying to explore a little bit of Axon and see if it's something that might be useful for them, that they want to explore a little bit more of. I think we do have great documentation on that as well. So I will make sure I put those links in our episode today, so that everybody can have access to it. But I really appreciate your time. I know you're super duper busy, and I really always enjoy talking to you. So thank you so much for making the time for me today.
Sure thing, Sarah. It was a pleasure.
Thank
always
you so much.
Very keen on doing things like this. And I'd like to add a single thing with the couple of minutes we have left. You started with those quick start videos, right?
Yes.
And I know there is some request for doing more. I'd very much like to do more. Yes. But for people listening to this podcast, if there is a way to drop in the comments that, yes, I am interested, I'd very much like to hear that, because that means I can prioritize that even further. So if you're listening and you feel, yes, this is valuable, just nudge me.
And also to add to that real quick, we do the fast lane trainings, and they're done once or twice a month. They're completely free. You can just
True.
sign up for them, get on board, and they're quick, broad explanation of what we just talked about today, as well as some of the more detailed parts of the framework. So I think that might be really useful if somebody's really interested in this topic to go and find out. I will make sure that we have the link as well. They're usually 1 hour of explanation, and then there's a little bit of exercise that a participant can take time at the second half of the training to do that exercise. And if they have any questions, they can right on the spot communicate with you or whoever is doing the training. And we also have a fantastic set of panelists who are there answering questions. So we're always available. And then, Stephen, just to conclude the helpful part of this conversation,
Sure.
do we have other places that people can ask questions, like Google Group, Stack Overflow?
Yeah. Those works. We have a dedicated Google group for
Mhm.
Axon,
Mhm.
which we try to track, but it's also a nice package with concluding a lot of other information of all the requests as well.
Right.
But Stack Overflow is also something we monitor. That would be the preferred modes. I know you can create issues on GitHub,
Mhm.
but those are really for bugs and features. So please do your questions on Google
On
Group and
Google Groups,
Stack Overflow.
exactly. Yes, and also Twitter too, because we are very active on Twitter as well. So
True.
if people have any
Yeah.
questions, feel free to drop us a line.
That would work.
Myself, Stephen is always there. Alart is there, so we can always help anybody who has questions, concerns, comments, suggestions. Yeah, we'd love it all.
True.
Yeah,
Exactly.
awesome. Thank you so much again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Sarah. The same for you, of course.
Ciao.
Talk to you soon.
All righty. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my talk with Stephen. Please join me next time as I talk about the specifics of an aggregate. Until then, have a great time and happy coding.